The Cellar. In today's video, we are going to discuss some of human history's most despicable methods of causing harm to one another. In a prior video, I discussed the terrifying Brazen Bull. Today, we are going to dive into the most aptly named rat torture. Rat torture was used as far back as 60 CE in the Roman Empire. It is not known when exactly rats were first used in such a despicable way, but from the Roman Empire and on, they have played a pivotal role in the barbaric treatment of those deemed guilty of such justice. Nero, Claudius, Caesar, Augustus Germanicus was a Roman emperor and the final emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, reigning from AD 54 until his death in AD 68. Emperor Nero himself enjoyed using rodents as one of his many tools of justice. He would implement such horrifying cruelty against anyone he deemed to be his enemy at the time. Heading over to India, prisoners reportedly underwent horrible punishment via rats, as prisoners would be placed in loose-fitting pants. They would then tie the pants off tightly around the ankles before pouring rats into the pants from around the waist. With their pants now full of the hungry vermin, the critters would scratch and bite in all directions while trying to escape. Stretching between 1066 and 1485, London was experiencing their medieval times. The Tower of London had a special dungeon dedicated specifically to rat torture. Beneath the waterline of the River Thames, prisoners would be thrown into the dark black void while the tide was low. As the tide would come back in, the water would rise and rats would float in with it. The prisoners would not be able to see anything in the pitch black space. All they could do was listen closely as they heard the feet of the rats scurrying about. The rats would eventually crawl over their bodies as they lay there on the cold floor. The rats, as hungry as ever, were said to have taken bites out of the prisoners. These early methods were simple and crude, to say the least, as the real horror and sheer creativity would come later during the Dutch Revolt in the 16th and 17th century. I will warn, this method I am about to discuss is pretty gruesome, so if you want to skip ahead, I wouldn't blame you one bit. It is said that during the Dutch Revolt, rats would be captured and placed into specially designed bottomless cages. Prisoners would then be restrained before the special cage full of rats were placed on their abdomen. Once in place, hot burning coals would be set into a tray on the top of the cage. This would then cause the metal of the cage to heat from above. As the metal got hotter and hotter, the rats would do everything they could to get away from the scalding heat, including digging their way through the prisoner's abdomen. As barbaric as all this sounds, the method would actually prove to be extremely useful at extracting information from enemies. It's said that often men would give up everything they knew before the coals were even lit. It is also said that even after information was obtained, some would still proceed with the punishment. This method would last well into the 20th century, as some South American countries continued the absolutely horrific method. Serial killer Richard Kuklinski, otherwise known as the Iceman, was also said to have used rats as a form of torture. In interviews with the man before his death, he stated that one preferred method he used to take lives involved tying a victim up and leaving them within a cave overnight. Within the cave, the victim would be eaten alive by rats. Richard claimed to leave a Super 8 camera within the cave to film the events, but if you know anything about the Iceman, a lot of his claims lack any real evidence. So many speculate how truthful he ever was with the many stories he told. In 2010, a case involving rats came to light. as on October 16, 2010, in Lakewood, New Jersey, a man named David Wax was alleged to have threatened his kidnapping victim, Yisrael Brixman, with rat torture. He threatened this unless he agreed to give his wife a get, otherwise known as a Jewish divorce document. He was eventually sentenced to 7 years in prison for assisting in a kidnapping. Whether his claims were real or not, it still shows the sheer depravity that people will go to against others. Like the Brazen Bull story I already discussed, the use of rat torture was a horrifyingly inventive way that mankind harmed one another. Just be glad that we don't currently exist in the time where rat torture was as popular as it once was. This next horrible fate involved something as simple as scalding hot water, a fate typically reserved for shellfish or the pasta you plan to make tonight with dinner. Death by boiling is a method in which a person's life is taken by them being immersed in a boiling liquid. This is not one of the most common forms of torture, but boiling has been practiced in many parts of Europe and Asia. The most terrifying aspect is that boiling is a lengthy process. This makes it one of the most painful methods we will discuss. Throughout history, victims were often placed inside of a large vessel, such as a cauldron or a sealed kettle. It would then be filled with water, oil, or tar. The large cauldron would then be placed over an open flame and would slowly heat to a boil, with the victim enduring horrible pain within. In England, the use of boiling alive as a method of torture or execution was rare, but it did take place. In 1531, King Henry VIII officially made boiling alive the form of capital punishment for murders committed by poisoning. In February of 1531, a cook gave numerous people poisoned porridge, which resulted in 2 deaths. Through other methods of torture, a confession was eventually obtained, and that cook was subsequently boiled alive on April 15th of 1532. Fast forward 10 years to 1542, and boiling was once again handed down as punishment to a woman named Margaret Davy. Davy had also used poison on her victims and subsequently suffered an agonizing fate. During the Middle Ages in the Holy Roman Empire, counterfeiters, swindlers, coin forgers, and some who committed horrifying murders were boiled alive within oil. Other examples of such horrifying methods include 16th century Japan. The semi-legendary bandit Ishikawa Gomen and his son were boiled alive in the 1590s. In 1675, a Sikh martyr named Bhai Dayala was boiled to death after he refused to convert to Islam. Following this refusal, he was placed into a cauldron of cold water. The cauldron was then heated to its boiling point, ending Dayala's life in the most agonizing of ways. Now, you may think to yourself, boiling people alive can't still be going on in this day and age. Well, if you think that, then prepare to be wrong. As according to Insight Crime, 31,000 people were killed by militants of Shining Path in Peru between the years 1980 and 2000. It is reported that some of those 31,000 lives were claimed via boiling alive. Even the government of Uzbekistan from 1991 to 2016 has been alleged to have boiled suspected terrorists, this method being used for both torture and execution. At the end of the day, the method is as simplistic as it gets, but its simplicity doesn't take away from how horrifyingly painful and slow of a fate boiling is. This next method of torture that we're going to dive into is that of the Iron Maiden. The Iron Maiden is a device consisting of a solid iron cabinet. The cabinet has a hinged front and spike-covered interior. It was made tall in order to enclose a full human being within it. The human-shaped box was decorated on the inside with incredibly sharp spikes that would, presumably, impale through the victim on either side when the box was shut on them. But the spikes were not made long enough to kill a person outright. The spikes were short and placed in such a way that the victim would die a slow and agonizing death, bleeding out over an extended period of time. Now, this device is one that many people are familiar with. It was widely believed that the device was used throughout the medieval period, but the first actual stories that cite the Iron Maiden were composed in the 19th century. It is argued and believed that the Iron Maiden may be nothing more than a myth, as actual evidence of their use has never truly been found. Whether or not human life suffered within one, we may not ever have a clear-cut answer. But let's dive into the history. The first written reference to the Iron Maiden didn't appear until the late 1700s, long after the Middle Ages had come to an end. Now let's dive into the first actual mention of the Iron Maiden device. The first mention of the Iron Maiden actually came from an 18th century writer named Johann Philipp Siebenkees. He would go on to describe the device in a guidebook to the city of Nuremberg. In this guidebook, he wrote about an execution that took place in 1515 in Nuremberg. The criminal was allegedly placed within a device that was very reminiscent of a sarcophagus. This sarcophagus was lined on the inside with sharp spikes. The victim would be placed inside the device and had his life slowly ended via the numerous sharp spikes penetrating various parts of his body. It is said that the man suffered for multiple days within the device, as the spikes penetrated his arms, legs, belly, chest, bladder, shoulder, and his eyes. None of the spikes were long enough to take his life outright, so he remained within the box suffering day after day until the blood loss finally did the victim in. Now, whether or not this story is true is open for debate, as many scholars believe Siebenkees may have outright invented the story. After Siebenkees published his account, Iron Maidens began to appear in museums across Europe and the United States. They were pieced together using various medieval artifacts and scraps and put on display for those willing to pay a fee. The most famous of these devices was the Iron Maiden of Nuremberg, which wasn't constructed until the early 19th century. It would later end up destroyed during a bombing by Allied forces in 1944. Ultimately, the Iron Maiden of Nuremberg was eventually deemed to be a fake, but some have claimed that it was used as early as the 12th century. Bringing us to more modern times, an Iron Maiden was found at the site of the Iraqi National Olympic Committee in Baghdad in 2003. The son of Saddam Hussein headed the committee, and it is believed that he may have used such a device on athletes that didn't perform well. Like a lot of things reported throughout history, sometimes it's simply not possible to know exactly where the truth lies. Was the Iron Maiden device ever actually used on human beings like some believe it was? We simply can't know for sure, but the idea behind the device is terrifying and captivating all around. Like many other devices used throughout history, it's hard to think about how much someone may have suffered within such a terrifying creation of man. At the end of the day, I'm just grateful that I never had to come face to face with any of the methods we discussed in today's video. So please let me know in the comments section below what you thought of today's episode. This was a little bit different than what we normally discuss on the channel, but after I covered the Brazen Bull, it left me inquisitive about other methods of torture used throughout history. What do you think of the topics we talked about today? And is there any specific method of torture you'd like me to discuss in a future episode? Also, as a little bit of a bonus, I am going to take the Brazen Bull episode that I did in a prior video and add it on right here. So for those of you that have not seen it, if you'd like to check it out, obviously it goes really, really well with today's topic and today's video. So I'm going to add that right here before we get to the end. And yeah, thank you guys for tuning into this episode. For this next story, we're going to touch on one of the most horrifying devices ever made. This device was designed in ancient Greece, and it not only ended lives, it ended them in one of the most terrifyingly painful ways. The Brazen Bull was allegedly created by Perillus of Athens, a bronze worker in the 6th century BCE. Following its creation, Perillus introduced the device to Phalaris, the tyrant of Acragas, a Greek city located in Sicily. The tyrant Phalaris was well known for his pure savagery and cruelty. He ruled Acragas in fear from 570 to 554 BCE. According to history, Phalaris requested a device that would make executions a public spectacle. He wanted to use the device to instill fear and obedience within the people who lived under his rule. The device's design was said to be a master stroke of ancient artisanship, a life-sized bull cast entirely in bronze, with a door on the side for the victim to be placed inside. The bull was hollow, allowing enough room for a human being to be crammed in. Ultimately, the device itself was designed with the idea of placing a victim within and then lighting a fire underneath. When a fire was lit beneath it, the bronze bull would heat up, slowly roasting the person inside. The Brazen Bull also had an acoustic apparatus. This apparatus would turn the victim's screams into the sounds of a bellowing bull for those on the outside to hear. The mouth of the bull was engineered in such a way that it served as a sort of resonating system. As the person within would cook, their agonizing screams were transformed into the bellowing of an infuriated bull. This provided a grimly ironic spectacle for those in attendance. Following the presentation of the bull to the tyrant Phalaris, it is said that the tyrant's cruel sense of irony was soon brought to light, as he supposedly forced the creator, Perillus, into the bull. It's been said that Perillus, when presenting the bull, made a comment about how the screaming victims would sound like a bellowing bull. This ultimately intrigued Phalaris immensely, leading to his order for Perillus to climb inside the bull and demonstrate its capabilities. Once Perillus was within the bull, Phalaris locked the door and had a fire lit underneath, ultimately roasting the device's creator inside. This would make Perillus, the man who designed the bull himself, the very first victim of its horrible cruelty. At the end of the day, historians have debated for decades the authenticity of the bull, with some arguing that the device may be more legend than reality, a horrifying story that has been embellished over the centuries. Whether the device was real or not, it displays the unending depths of human cruelty and how far some will go when using terror as a tool for maintaining their power over the masses. The idea of being locked away in such a device is that of absolute nightmares. As always, thank you all for tuning in to another episode, and if you enjoy the content, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps the channel continue to grow. Also, if you want to make sure you don't ever miss a new upload, you can turn on the bell notification after you've subscribed to the channel. In the description box below, you will also find a link to my merch store and a link to the Cellar Dwellers membership tier for the channel. It's only $2.99 a month, and if you're interested, please take a moment to check those things out. If you'd like to submit your own scary story or any kind of story recommendation, you can do so using the email I have linked in the description box below. As always, I do all my research, writing, recording, and editing for the channel myself, so anything that you do to support the channel is greatly appreciated. Until next time, I will see you all again as we head back into the cellar.